Questions from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Scarr. Can I go now to Senator McKim? And then I'll go to you, Senator Lambie. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Look, I've just got a really quick question first on the situation regarding temporary visa holders who are applying for an exemption to the inbound travel ban from India, and acknowledging that those more rigorous criteria from India were put in place when the Delta variant first emerged there. Why is that still in place only for India? Why does it not apply to the many other countries where the Delta variant is now running rampant?
Senator Michael Outram. So I'm still receiving health advice from the Chief Medical Officer of the Commonwealth to exercise caution in relation to India, and I understand that's a combination of not just the epidemiology but the number of Australians who are present in India and the risk it still presents. But there are also constraints in relation to, for example, Papua New Guinea as well. So India isn't just on its own. There's also different arrangements at the moment in relation to Papua New Guinea.
All right, thanks, Commissioner. But, the Delta variant's running rampant in the UK, the US, many European countries, many other Asian countries at a much higher percentage, I might add, than it is currently in India. What's the most recent advice you have in regards to this, and what's the process for ongoing review of this decision?
Well, the decision makers, and let me first say this, the decision makers don't, unless there's specific advice in relation to a country, look at the country where the person's coming from. We obviously just turn our minds in the Border Force to the exemption criteria. So as you're aware, there are a lot of people who are auto-exempt because they are either Australians, permanent residents, immediate family, and so on and so forth, diplomats who are obviously registered to Australia, military and so on, and then there are a number of discretionary exemption categories that we turn our mind to. So unless as I have been, I'm asked to turn my mind particularly to the particular countries, we were with India because of the outbreak that was there in sort of May, and PNG, then we don't really attend to the country of origin. As you rightly say, I mean, COVID's present throughout the world, so from a risk point of view, it's difficult for our decision makers to make a decision based on a gut feel about a country's risk.
No, I'm certainly not asking you that your decision makers do that, Commissioner, and given your answer, perhaps I could just ask Mr Pezzullo whether he's aware of what the process is for reviewing the health advice and whether he would commit to raising this issue with his colleagues who are actually providing the health advice on which this policy is based.
Thank you, Senator. I don't see the need to, insofar as the Commissioner has a direct line of communication with the CMO. I'm sometimes party to those meetings, but it's not as though Professor Kelly would need any additional request or any additional prompting, if that's the right way to put it, from me over and above what Commissioner Outram needs to do his job.
All right, no worries. We'll raise that in another forum then. Thanks for that. Look, I wanted to ask about separated families. So these are families of temporary visa holders who are separated in terms of one or more of the children of those families still being stuck overseas. When I raised this in Senate estimates on 24th of May, an officer from Home Affairs said this: if the child resided in Australia before the restrictions came into place, that is the travel restrictions, we would take that into account for that child to return, and then went on to say, I don't think we have any of those scenarios in play because we have facilitated that. My office subsequently wrote to the Commissioner highlighting 25 families who actually did fall into that category and had their applications for exemption repeatedly refused. 4 of those families have since had their travel ban exemption applications approved, and I thank you for that, Commissioner. But given that there are still 21 families that we've informed you about where the child or children have been separated from one or more of their parents for a year and a half now, and given the testimony that was provided to the Senate that the department believed there were no more of those scenarios in play, and given that there are clearly more of those scenarios in play, where are we with addressing the at least 21 more families that have been separated from their children for nearly a year and a half now? And why are they still being refused an exemption?
Well, thanks, Senator. Without going through each individual case, but I'm glad to hear that we've at least been able to apply our minds and get full good outcomes from that. Now, you're right to say that in general, our position is that if the child was resident in Australia before the travel ban was put in place, and I think it was the 25th of March 2020, then we will take that into account. So I'll ask the team to revisit again the decisions, and I'm pretty scrupulous in this regard. And if we think we've made a decision that doesn't fit within the criteria, we'll accept that and make a different decision. So we'll revisit the list and make sure that we haven't made any erroneous decisions.
All right, thanks, Commissioner. I do appreciate that, and I'll follow that up with a letter to you, just detailing those cases that my office is aware of, and I thank you for your commitment to review those cases. I wanted to ask about people who hold subclass 300 visas, that is, prospective marriage visas. As you'd be aware, I guess technically this would be a question to you, Mr. Pezzullo. I presume you're aware that the Senate passed a motion on the 22nd of June 2021 calling on the government to make holders of PMV 300 visas automatically exempt from the travel ban. In an answer to a question on notice, which I think came back either last night or this morning, your department has said that the government has not asked you for advice on making this group automatically exempt from the travel ban. Is that still the case, that despite the Senate passing a motion expressly calling on the government to make holders of PMV 300 visas automatically exempt from the travel ban, that the government actually has not asked you to provide advice on that?
Senator, I'd be keen to even at the table review the response to the question on notice, because it is the case, and perhaps it's just a question of timing, having regard to the intention of the Senate, clearly set out in its motion, that it is the case that we are developing policy advice for the government. Now, whether it fits the parameter of have you been asked, I can assure you, Senator, we are looking at both the number of cases where the distribution of those visa holders would be. Obviously, there would be, in some cases, some challenges around actual travel, and it gets back to some of the issues that Mr. Sheehan was speaking about. But it is the case that matter is currently being considered in terms of the development of options for ministers. Yes, I'm just cautioning my answer just insofar as whatever document you have before you, which I think you said is a response to a question on notice, and you've only received it recently. I just want to make sure that I read that, and if I need to come back to you with further clarification, and maybe it's just the terms in which the officer who drafted the response couched the response, whether we have been tasked, I can assure you that that options are being explored.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pezzullo. And it may, just to be fair to your officer who replied to that question, it may have been the terms that the question was asked, not just the view of your officer. But just so that I'm clear, Mr. Pezzullo, on the evidence you've just given, you have just informed the committee that, in fact, the department is considering the issue of the subclass 300 visa holders with a view to providing advice to government. Would that be correct?
I certainly won't indicate the nature of the advice. Obviously, we need to provide that to ministers first, and then. But as a matter of process, and it's largely to do with the ongoing nature of the pandemic, the modelling that is both at a global level and also nationally suggestive that there is still a ways to go. We don't want to deny people their right, given that they're the grantees, they are the receivers of a lawful entitlement to be united with their prospective marriage partner. We are looking at how we can facilitate that by way of options. Obviously, there are any number of issues to address. I don't want to detain the committee, but the obvious ones would relate to quarantine. There's caps, there's exemptions, there's flights. But in terms of the visa, which is, the narrow question to be considered under law, and whether perhaps extensions can be granted, or at least some kind of assurance given to such visa holders that, if you like, the clock won't just run out on them. We are exploring what's possible within the Migration Act, and then there are the logistical issues, and then the Commissioner would then need to turn his mind to exemptions, either by way of case by case, or I think you might have made mention of auto exempt. Commissioner, unless you've got a view that might assist me in my answer, I don't think we're at a point yet of coming to a concluded view about whether it should be an auto exemption, but it might be a case of just working through those grants to make sure that people don't suffer as a consequence of the ongoing nature of the pandemic, the restrictions in quarantine places, lack of availability of flights, and so on and so forth.
Senator McKim, we just have got a couple more minutes before I have to go to Senator Lambie.
All right, thank you. And thanks for that, Mr Pezzullo. Could I also ask, would that, the consideration that the department is currently giving to the situation that PMB 300 visa holders find themselves in, does that also extend to people who hold subclass 485 visas, given that Minister Hawke has publicly said that the government will consider offering an extension or freeze for existing subclass 485 visa holders?
Yes, so we are working through all classes and subclasses methodically, and we do it. It's, if you like, a standing approach, because the pandemic is ongoing. People have got visas that have been granted. Without, again, detouring into students, we're looking at also at what's been done for students. So this is not...
That's my next question.
Yes,
so thank you.
I thought we might be going there. So, look, we are regularly, for both the Home Affairs Minister and the Immigration Minister, keeping these matters under review. Just for the information of the committee and for the Senate, and an officer has very helpfully provided me with a briefing number. It's not actually the question on notice, but that's okay. It's certainly got some data that's of interest. As of the 30th...
We're happy if you tabled that, Mr Pezzullo.
Oh, no way. Sorry, Chair.
I was going to say, well, that now puts the challenge at me, doesn't it?
Well, I'll read it out.
Yeah.
I'll read it out. So, but as at 30 June 21, just to give you a sense of scale, Senator, which then goes to the logistics about flights, quarantine caps, and so on and so forth, there were... so this is just on a month ago, 30 June, 1,957 prospective marriage subclass 300 visa holders outside of Australia. There's the other category that you mentioned that Mr Hawke's made some announcements about. We're looking at students. None of this is easy because of all of the issues that also relate to returning Australians. It's not straightforward, but I also want to give you and the committee and the Senate through this committee confidence that it's not as though it's out of mind. We are actively looking at what can be done. And just so that I avoid the wrath of the Chair, the other points in the brief that require that mean that the document doesn't need to be tabled is that holders of these visas, of course, they're not necessarily immediate family members because it's a prospective marriage situation, are currently being considered on a case-by-case basis. So it's not to say that the Commissioner can't, on compelling and compassionate grounds, issue an exemption. Just to round it out, last October, as part of a budget measure, the government announced that refunds would be available for those prospective marriage visa holders who had been unable to enter Australia due to COVID-related travel restrictions. Now, at least that deals with the financial cost. Their ongoing relationship, the fact that two people want to get married, is something that we also would take into account. So that's as much information as I've got for you at this stage, Senator. Obviously, you've got an interest in it, which is ongoing. We'll update you at the next opportunity.
All right. Thanks, Mr Pezzullo.
Final question, Senator McKim.
Final question. Okay. In that case, I guess a question for the Commissioner on the basis of responses that have been given to us in regards to subclass 300 visa holders, they've currently got an 88% rejection rate, despite the existence of a compelling and compassionate criteria. And obviously, Commissioner, you'd be aware these are situations where Australian citizens have fiancés who are overseas, and so they're people who want to marry either Australian citizens or Australian permanent residents. And I wonder if you could just respond to the fact that despite the existence of a compelling and compassionate criteria, there is an 88% rejection rate on applications for exemption from the inbound travel ban.
Senator, I don't dispute that, and as the Secretary has said, we will work with the Department and provide advice to government around the policy settings and the exemption settings.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Senator McKim. Senator Lambie.